Hello, Awakening Report fans. It's great to see you again. Tonight, we're going to do a special discussion, a special research project that I've been working on. It's Mystery Babylon, the Mother of the Harlots Revealed. And so I am very excited to bring this to you. And it's going to be great. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So why don't we just go ahead and jump right in, and I will be monitoring it so that I make sure that my slides are showing up as they ought to. So that's pretty much all I have to do. I'm on the controls at every level here, so I'm trying to make sure that I keep everything under control. If I have a little bit of time, I will take your questions, but I only have so much time, so I do apologize about that. Let's get started, and we will get right into this presentation. So the question of who is Mystery Babylon is something that people have been looking at for a very long time now. And I want to just state very clearly up front that I'm not going to have all the answers. All right. I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I want to give a basic big overview so that we can have a good sense of what is really going on in this passage. So let's get started. We're going to uncover the ancient identity of the woman who rides the beast. So we start in Revelation 17. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and talked with me, saying to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead was a name was written, Mystery Babylon. Mystery Babylon. Wow. The mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. But the angel said to me, "Why did you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is not and yet is. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, one is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. The beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th, and is of the 7, and is going to perdition. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. These are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. These will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful." Then he said to me, "The waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind, and to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman whom you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth." All right, so this is chapter 17. There's a lot in here. And again, I'm not going to cover every last detail because I just don't have the time to do that. Lots of amazing questions. We're going to just focus specifically on the description of this woman who rides the beast. That's really what we want to look at, and we're going to get a good sense of it. So I believe in chapter 17, we're getting kind of a spiritual overview, and in chapter 18, it would seem to be a more physical city kind of overview. So let's jump into Revelation 18, and then we will begin to unpack all of this against history and ancient religions and cults, etc., so we can have a sense of who this is actually talking about. After these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive of her plagues. For her sins have reached to heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Render to her just as she rendered to you, and repay her double according to her works. In the cup which she has mixed, mix double for her. In the measure that she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, in the same measure give her torment and sorrow. For she says in her heart, I sit as queen and am no widow, and will not see sorrow. Therefore her plagues will come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord who judges her. The kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her will weep and lament for her when they see the smoke of your burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, the great city Babylon, that mighty city! For in 1 hour your judgment has come, and the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her. For no one buys their merchandise anymore, merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen and purple, silk and scarlet, every kind of citron wood, every kind of object of ivory, every kind of object of most precious wood, bronze, iron, and marble, and cinnamon, incense, fragrant oil, and frankincense, wine and oil, fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and chariots, and bodies and souls of men. The fruit that your soul longed for has gone from you, and all the things which are rich and splendid have gone from you, and you shall find them no more at all. The merchants of these things who became rich by her will stand at a distance for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city which was clothed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour such great riches came to nothing. Every shipmaster, all who travel by ship, sailors, and as many as trade on the sea, stood at a distance and cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What is like this great city? They threw dust on their heads and cried out, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city, in which all who had ships on the sea became rich by her wealth. For in 1 hour she is made desolate. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you, holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you on her. Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, Thus with violence the great city Babylon shall be thrown down, and shall not be found any more. The sound of harpists, musicians, flutists, and trumpeters shall not be heard in you any more. No craftsman, nor any craft shall be found in you any more. And the sound of a millstone shall not be heard in you any more. The light of a lamp shall not shine in you any more. And the voice of a bridegroom and bride shall not be heard in you any more. For your merchants were the great men of the earth. For by your sorcery all the nations were deceived. And in her was found the blood of prophets and saints, and of all who were slain on the earth. All right, so there's a lot of questions here. Who is the who is the Apostle John speaking about? Of course, that is the big question, and so we really need to understand who this is referring to. We need a few more passages in Scripture just to give us a better sense of who this could be talking about. So I want us to go over to 1 Peter, 1 Peter chapter 5. And in there, 1 Peter chapter 5, Peter is talking about the people who are in Babylon. Now, let me go ahead, and I'm just going to share my screen with you so that I can share this part of the biblical understanding as well. So let's cruise over here to our trusty Bible software, the Word Bible software. Great stuff. If you don't have it, it is free. You can go ahead and get it. All right. So Peter is writing, and he says, She who is in Babylon, elect together with you, greets you, and so does Mark, my son. Kind of interesting stuff. Now, some people think that he's making a veiled reference to Rome, okay, because there was no more Babylon. Well, that really is a misnomer, because there kind of was a Babylon and there kind of wasn't a Babylon. All right, and I'm not trying to be facetious here, but what I want to get at is that while there was a location called Babylon, there wasn't a particular city called Babylon. So by the first century, Babylon, the city, Babylon, the great city built by the second Babylon, of course, the new Babylon was built by Nebuchadnezzar. That city was no longer. But the outskirts of Babylon were still in existence, and there were a lot of Jews living in that area. So we still have this area called Babylon. And that's very important to understand. Now let's go to Isaiah chapter 48. Um, Actually, let me go back to 47. There we go. All right. So we notice something in the text in Revelation chapter 17. It says that she's going to say that I am no widow. All right. So here we have God bringing a judgment upon Babylon. Come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground without a throne, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for you shall no more be called tender and delicate. Take the millstones and grind meal, remove your veil, etc. We're going to just keep moving on beyond that so that we can get through this. He says, sit in silence and go into darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for you shall no longer be called the lady of kingdoms. I was angry with my people, and I have profaned my inheritance and given them into your hand. You showed them no mercy, and you laid a very heavy yoke, very heavily, and you said, I shall be a lady forever, so that you did not take these things to heart, nor remember the latter end of them. Therefore, hear this now, you who are given to pleasures, who dwell securely, who say in your heart, I am, and there is no one else beside me. I shall not sit as a widow, nor shall I know the loss of children. All right, so that's actually in Revelation 18, verse 7. All right, in a moment, in one day, the loss of children and widowhood, they shall come upon you in their fullness because of the multitude of your sorceries, for a great abundance of your enchantments. All right, so who is he really talking about? Is he talking about the Babylon in the days of Nebuchadnezzar? Well, that's one possibility, except that the city of Babylon was never destroyed. It rather just kind of fell back into dust. So you recall that after the days of Nebuchadnezzar, all right, we have the Persian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire coming in, and they take over. You recall the writing on the wall, right? That is in the book of Daniel, chapter 5. That's the tail end of the Babylonian Empire, and it falls in a night. But the city itself is not destroyed. It is captured. It's taken over by the Medo-Persians, but the city itself is not destroyed. And it's a relatively relatively nonviolent takeover. Not everybody is destroyed. And in fact, what happens is the army comes in rather stealthily, and they take over in a night. And so there isn't a lot of fighting that happens. But slowly, we see that the city becomes less and less important. Now, Alexander the Great did make his way to Babylon. All right, so it was still standing in his days, but it was already starting to go into disrepair. And then somewhere in the second century BC, the city becomes very unimportant, and again, the city proper just kind of turns back to dust. You still have a large Jewish population. The third largest in the ancient world is living in the vicinity of Babylon. Okay, so kind of think of Manhattan, which is New York, right? So if Manhattan, the island, was destroyed, but all the suburbs around it were still around, we might still call that New York because it's that general area. Even though Queens is not in New York itself, but it's still what we call the greater New York area. And so we have this greater Babylon area that is in existence in the first century, while the city itself is not actually there. So the question is, did God destroy the city in 1 hour? Do we really see that destruction? I would argue we don't. And so I would suggest that we still are going to see a destruction of that very city. And so this takes us back to our presentation. Again, let me share my screen with you so that we can get back into that. Really interesting things that we need to take a look at. So let's keep on going. Here we are, Revelation 18. And let's just keep moving forward. If my computer will advance. All right. So, oops. All right, here we go. So now we have some other references in the Bible concerning this person. And I'm going to suggest that this person is, in fact, Inanna or Ishtar, the queen of heaven. All right, so let's go back to Deuteronomy 32. They provoked him to jealousy with foreign gods, with abominations. They provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons, not to God. All right, so foreign gods, false gods, are in fact demons. That's very important to establish. In my opinion, demons and fallen angels are the exact same thing. I'm basing that on really two things. You have the Hebrew Elohim, which we translated as God or gods, and that's a fair translation. But it really, the basic meaning is mighty ones. The Greek daimonia just means mighty ones. Okay, so demons and gods are really equivalent, are their equivalents in these different languages. And demons don't always have to be bad, at least not in Greek mythology. In of course Christian in Christian vernacular, this becomes a very bad entity, but they're not always considered to be bad. So again, my understanding is that demons and fallen angels are the exact same things, but that's outside of the scope of this presentation. All right, to gods they did not know, to new gods, new arrivals that your fathers did not know or did not fear. All right, we come to Jeremiah. Hundreds of years later, God says, will you steal, murder, commit adultery, swear falsely, burn incense to Baal, and walk after other gods whom you do not know, and then come and stand before me in this house, which is called by my name, and say, we are delivered to do all these abominations? Has this house, which is called by my name, become a den of thieves in your eyes? Behold, even I, have seen it, says the Lord. They gather wood, the fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead dough to make cakes for the queen of heaven, and they pour out drink offerings to other gods, that they may provoke me to anger. And later on in the book of Jeremiah, the people answer, we don't want to go after God. We're going to keep doing what we've been doing. They say, we will certainly do whatever has gone out of our own mouth to burn incense to the queen of heaven and pour out drink offerings to her, as we have done, we and our fathers, our kings and our princes in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem, for then we had plenty of food, were well off, and saw no trouble. Wow. So we have the worship of the Queen of Heaven in the south. We also have it in the north as well. So this is rampant in those days. Who could this be? Well, let's keep going in the text. We have in Ezekiel, God takes Ezekiel in a vision, takes him by the lock of the hair over to Jerusalem, and he says, look through the wall. And it says, so he brought me to the door of the north gate of the Lord's house, and to my dismay, women were sitting there weeping for Tammuz. Then he said to me, have you seen this, O son of man? Turn again, you'll see greater abominations than these. All right. Wow. Bad stuff happening in the temple itself. So we have now the Queen of Heaven, and we have Tammuz. Well, there was this ancient religious cult, and it was a reenactment of the marriage of Inanna and Dumuzi. All right, so Inanna is also known as Ishtar. All right, Inanna and Ishtar are the same exact thing. Inanna in Sumerian is the Akkadian version of Ishtar. And then by the time we come to the Bible, Ishtar turns into Ashtoreth or Asherah, just depending on which language we're taking this out of, but they're all related. And Dumuzi is, in fact, Tammuz. All right, so D's and T's are often interchangeable. We can see in other languages that P's and B's and V's are all interchangeable. Sometimes F's are as well. All right, so these are just the kind of the mechanics of language, and it helps us understand how we can put these together. Now, there's one more aspect to this, and this is the ancient word for a harlot, which is a kadeshah. And we see that zonah, which means to prostitute yourself, and kadesha, which is somebody who is holy, have the exact same meaning. So we have where Judah, he goes to um, a place, and it says when he saw her, he thought she was a harlot because she had covered her face. Turns out it's his daughter-in-law, right? Not so cool. Then he asked the men of that place, saying, "Where is the harlot Kadeshah who was openly by the roadside?" And they said there was no harlot in this place. Now, so notice here, he thinks that she's a zonah because she's prostituting herself. And then he asks, "Where is the Kadeshah?" All right. So the Kadeshah, now you might know this word already. Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. You've heard of that word, right? Holy, holy, holy. All right. And I think holy is a very misunderstood word. We think that it means morally pure, without any fault, absolutely good. But that's not necessarily what it means. Kadeshah or Kadosh is something that is absolutely set apart. All right. And it doesn't have to be set apart for a good reason. It could be set apart for something very bad. I suggest that the holiest thing in my house is my toilet brush because it does one function and one function only. All right. It never does any double duty. So you can figure out what it does. All right. And once it's fulfilled its duty, it goes back into the holder. And when I think it's too old, I throw it away. All right. I don't use it for anything else. That's the only function that it has. So here, this harlot, which is in English, really is kadesha, and it's the same thing. So it's somebody who is in that place of becoming some kind of a sexual prostitute, some kind of a temple prostitute. So also known as a ritual harlot. We see this in Deuteronomy 23:17. There shall be no ritual harlot. The word ritual is in italics because it's not actually in the text. Of the daughters of Israel, or a perverted one of the sons of Israel. All right, so again, this harlotry, this sexual perversion is not to be done. All right, so we're starting to see that there's kind of these two different aspects. All right, in God's economy, it's to be morally pure. All right, and we're going to see in Babylon that it's just the opposite. So again, I suggested that Inanna and Ishtar are the exact same person. And this person, Inanna or Ishtar, I'll use those terms interchangeably, but this is the one who was riding the beast. Now, this really came to me as I was doing some research for my upcoming movie, and I started looking at some of the ancient Sumerian and Babylonian ideas, and I stumbled upon this, that here you have the woman riding the beast. All right, so you can see here in the caption, rain goddess, possibly Inanna Ishtar, holding streams of rain and standing on the storm god's lion bird. So this is an Akkadian cylinder seal around 2300 to 2100 BCE. All right, so this goes back a very, very long way. Our best estimate of Abraham is around 2000 BC. Again, now some people put him a little bit earlier, 2100. Some people would say 1900. But, without getting into that whole debate, let's just say around 2000 just to keep it simple. All right, so here we have Inanna or Ishtar. Notice that she's naked. All right, that is the prostitute. That's the harlot. She's also known as the mother of harlots. She's riding a winged lion with some very strange feet, kind of the feet of an eagle. It's got an odd tail. We explored this a few weeks ago when we were looking at the manticore. Now, I don't think that this is exactly a manticore, but it is reminiscent of the idea of the manticore. So if you missed that, go and check out that study. But here we have the woman riding the beast. So I've given you the relief on the right side, and I've given you the drawing of that relief on the left side, just so it's easy to see what is happening there. So this is a motif that we're going to see again and again and again. And now some people have suggested that Mystery Babylon is New York City or Rome or something, but I would suggest we need to go all the way back to the very beginning, because God has had a very long hatred of Babylon for a long time, right? We see this clear back in Isaiah. Obviously, we see it in the book of Revelation. So we can't just say, well, it's New York City, because New York City, even though there's some definitely things that are wrong with New York City, I just don't think that it fits the bill. And so we really need to go far back in time to see that there's this ancient hatred that God has toward Inanna Ishtar, this woman who is riding the beast. So Inanna is an ancient Mesopotamian goddess associated with love, beauty, sex, desire, fertility, war, justice, and political power. She was originally worshipped in Sumer and was later worshipped by the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians under the name Ishtar. She was known as the Queen of Heaven and was the patron goddess of the Eanna temple in the city of Uruk, which she was her main cult center. She was associated with the planet Venus, and her most prominent symbols included the lion and the eight-pointed star. Her husband was the god Dumuzid, later known as Tammuz, and her Sukal, or her personal attendant, was the goddess Ninshubur, who later became the male deity Papsukal. Inanna was worshipped in Sumer at least as early as the Uruk period, around 4000 BC to 3100 BC. But she had little cult prior to the conquest of Sargon of Akkad. So again, now some of these dates I would suggest are perhaps fluid. If we have a biblical rendering of the flood of Noah, and I do believe that was a worldwide event, a very cataclysmic worldwide event. So if the flood of Noah is true, and if the Bible chronologies are accurate, then that would put Noah's flood somewhere around 2800 BC. Now, again, maybe give or take 500 years. Maybe we missed something, all right? But the point here is that this goes all the way back to the beginning, right? All the way back to the beginning. It's very important to understand that from the earliest of times, the worship and cult of Inanna was going on. All right. So, pretty much from, almost from day one of creation, at least according to the Bible, this cult has been going on. So it says during the post-Sargonic era, she became one of the most widely venerated deities in the Sumerian pantheon, with temples across Mesopotamia. The cult of Inanna Ishtar, which may have been associated with a variety of sexual rites, including, notice this, including homosexual transvestite priests and sacred prostitution, was continued by the East Semitic people who succeeded the Sumerians in the region. Very interesting. Now, it says that the beast that the woman is riding, now, in the context of the book of Revelation, the beast really seems to be the Antichrist, all right? That man who's going to rise up, and he's going to acquire all kinds of power for himself. Somehow, it's kind of a mix of he and that the 10 kings that are with him are going to turn on the woman, and they're going to destroy her. All right. And it may be more the 10 kings versus the beast himself. So, we'll have to wait and see on that one. But it says that she was especially beloved by the Assyrians, who elevated her to become the highest deity in their pantheon, ranking above their own national god, Ashur. That's huge. All right. This is very important to understand that really Inanna, or Ishtar, was the highest god there was. She was the highest god. Now, they never mistook her to be the creator, not at all. All right. And not necessarily the most powerful god, but the most important god. Now, this becomes really easy to understand when you start thinking about what they did. Right. What happened is you have a goddess who requires men to come and visit her and to take part in sexual rites. And, well, you can figure it out. Turns out guys are kind of into that. And this becomes a no-brainer. What do I have to do to worship this goddess? Oh, okay. Sounds like fun. And off they go, right? And we see this happened when Balak hires Balaam to curse the children of Israel, and he's not able to. And so Balaam really wants to get his reward, and so he tells Balak, "Listen, all you got to do is have the young ladies go in, tell the boys, hey boys, here's how we worship our gods, and then they will curse themselves." And so that was probably the same Inanna Ishtar cult that was happening in Moab. Again, probably Ashtoret or something, one of those names. And of course, God became upset, and it didn't turn out so well. So this is what's going on. It says here also that Inanna Ishtar is alluded to in the Hebrew Bible, and she greatly influenced the Phoenician goddess Astarte. Again, just depends on where you're talking about as far as the pronunciation. Who later influenced the development of the Greek goddess Aphrodite. Her cult continued to flourish until its gradual decline between the 1st and 6th centuries AD in the wake of Christianity. All right, so Christianity has its faults, but this is definitely a good thing that happened to help this go to its demise. So that's definitely a good thing. So we have so many examples of Ishtar or Inanna. This is Inanna, and she's resting her foot on the back of a lion while Ninshubur stands in front of her paying obeisance. All right. So we can see that she has some kind of a staff or a mace in her hand, some kind of a weapon. She has weapons protruding out from her shoulders. Presumably, she has some kind of a backpack or something that she's wearing. She has these weapons that are pointing out there. She seems to have some kind of wings. We're not really sure. At least I'm not sure what those are necessarily. But again, we see that she's beautiful, but she's also fierce. All right, so she's this goddess of sexuality, but also this goddess of war. She has both of those. Notice what's on her head. All right, she has some horns on her head. That's really important. So let's take a closer look here at what is on her head. So this is from the British Museum. The figures can be identified as gods by their pointed hats with multiple horns. All right, so to his left is the winged goddess Ishtar, the Sumerian Inanna. The weapons rising from her shoulders symbolize her warlike characteristics. And to, let's see, her right, actually, sorry, to her right is Enlil holding a bow. All right, so Inanna is in the circle there, whereas the one to the left of your screen is actually Enlil. All right, so Enlil, I believe, is the same as in Isaiah chapter 14, Halel, which we often translate as Lucifer, but I think that's really an unfortunate translation. But in the Hebrew, it's Halel. Halel probably comes from the Akkadian Elil, which comes from the Sumerian Enlil. Interesting that Enlil is holding a bow, because that's the very thing that we see that the Antichrist or the beast is going to be holding when he appears in Revelation chapter 6. Notice also, let's zoom in here a little bit, that he has 10 horns on his head, right? So you can see them, 5 on one side and 5 on the other. Now we see the motif of the 10 horns very strongly in the book of Daniel. After this, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong, and had huge teeth, iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up, before which 3 fell. So we got 10 horns to start with. Then 3 are going to somehow disappear. But then as those 3 disappear, there's this new horn, and this horn has eyes and a mouth, and it's going to speak pompous words. We understand that to be the same as the Antichrist or the beast that's referred to in the book of Revelation. All right, and again, I don't have time to get into all of that in this study, but point out the 10 horns. Notice in Revelation chapter 12, another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns. All right, so 10 horns. So again, this is Satan, is the devil, right? Is commonly referred to as Lucifer, but really the Hebrew in Isaiah chapter 14 is Halel, which is coming from the Akkadian Elil, which is coming from the Hebrew or from the Sumerian Enlil. All right, so Enlil and the devil, I think, are the same exact thing, which is of course this fire red dragon. Now, notice also that in Revelation 13, we have the beast. I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Well, this sounds very reminiscent. Why would this being have the same as the dragon? 7 heads, 10 horns, right? And he's got 7 diadems. Notice here, so the beast has 7 heads, 10 horns, and on his horns, 10 crowns, and on his heads, a blasphemous name. Now, why would he have the same exact description? Because it says, the dragon gave him his power, his throne, and his great authority. Wow. All right. So what I would suggest that if you are a king and you want to give your authority to somebody, what would you do? You would take off your crown and you would give it to them. And then you would say, come sit in my throne. And when you do that, everybody knows, wow, this other person is now wearing the crown and he's sitting in the throne. He has the power and the prerogatives of the king. So that is why we see these two having the same description, because Satan is going to give his power, his throne, and his authority to the beast. All right. Then we come to Revelation 17 again. And I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy. So apparently the scarlet beast that has the names of blasphemy is the same as the beast in Revelation 13, right? Because it says, and on his heads a blasphemous name, right? So this is the same being. All right. And so we continue to look at this, and then in Revelation 17:12, that the 10 horns, which you saw, are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. Wow. All right. So now, could it be New York City? I don't think so. I would suggest that we're going to be looking at a future rebuilt Babylon, all right, that'll be actually in the land of Iraq, and it's going to be completely rebuilt, and then something awful, well, is going to happen to it. But we're not quite there yet. So let's look at a few more motifs. If you have young ones, you might want to cover their eyes. I don't know. But here, this is the burning relief, which is believed to represent either Ishtar or could be her older sister. But this is the 19th or 18th century BC. Again, this goes back so far. Remember that she's called the mother of harlots. The word for harlotry is porneos, right? Pornography, right? Pornography. This is the same thing. And of course, where do we see that in our day? Well, of course we do. But notice what she's standing on here. She's on a beast once again. All right, so she's once again on a beast. Then we see this in a later time in the Greek myth of Aphrodite and Adonis, shown here on this altar from the Greek city of Taurus and Magna Graecia, dating to about 400 to 375 BC, is derived from the Mesopotamian myth of Inanna and Dumuzi. All right, so once again, this was all over the place. The idea that it was just something far removed is not the case. Somehow this caught on. Now, again, how could this have caught on? Well, again, think about what was happening. Think about what was required to worship this goddess, and, well, you kind of figure it out. That it was a very pleasurable kind of religion. And then we have from further away from a Hindu goddess, Durga. And I bring this out to show how rampant this was, and that it did not remain in the Middle East, but it was exported to places far and wide. So this is a statue from Aihole, temple of the Hindu goddess Durga, heavily armed with a lion At her side, slaying the buffalo demon, Durga's warrior aspects and associations with lions may be derived from Inanna. So she's not standing on the beast at this point, but she is guarded by the beast. All right, so similar idea. Now, going back in time a bit, we have the Ishtar Gate from the city of Babylon. And decorated all over this gate, we have lions, which is what we saw. Then we have some kind of a griffin, or potentially, I don't know, maybe a dinosaur or some strange looking creature. But this is presumably the same creature that we saw. I'm looking at the one in the middle here, the bottom middle picture. The bottom middle picture is that same kind of lionish, dragonish kind of creature. You can see that the hind feet are presumably some kind of eagle's talons or something like that. So it's very, very similar to what we've seen before. So these are the creatures that symbolize Inanna and Ishtar. Now, we spoke about the Kadesh, all right, or the Kadeshah, which is the ritual harlot. Here we see in Egyptian. Now, this is the New Kingdom. So this is probably around 1100 BC. So we have Kadesh standing on a lion posed between the Egyptian gods Min and Reshef. The god Min is the god of sex. I think that should be obvious. And the god Reshef. So there we have those. Another depiction of this. This is Kadeshet, Lady of Heaven, Mistress of all the gods, Eye of Ra without her equal. Again, this would be from the New Kingdom. This is a nude goddess with a prominent pubic triangle, or wearing a pubic covering, stands on a crouching lion. Her Hathor style coiffure is topped by horns extending to the sides. She wears a necklace and bracelets, etc. All right, so this is okay. So 1550 to 1200 BCE, and we see this same basic motif. This was everywhere. This was absolutely everywhere. We also see the 8-pointed star of Inanna. The 8-pointed star was Inanna's, or Ishtar's, most common symbol. We're not exactly sure what it meant necessarily, but here it is shown alongside the solar disk of her brother Shamash, that's the sun, and the crescent moon of her father Sin, the Numerian Nana, on a boundary stone of Meli Shipak, dating to the 12th century BC. Once again, lions were one of Inanna Ishtar's primary symbols. The lion above comes from the Ishtar Gate in the 8th century, the 8th gate, excuse me, to the inner city of Babylon, which was constructed around 575 BC under the orders of Nebuchadnezzar II. All right. Do we see it again? Well, we do. We see other motifs of this much, much, much later. So as we're thinking of Europe, we can see there on the far left, we have a drachma. This is a Greek drachma. And you can see there that Europe, or Europa, is being whisked away, really being kidnapped by Zeus, who has incarnated as a bull, and he's taken her away. He's kidnapping her. We see this even on some of the Euros. Again, they have this fascination with Europa being stolen away by the god Zeus. So really, probably what we have is just the same motif of the yesteryear. We can even see Katy Perry is riding the beast at one of the Super Bowl halftimes very recently. So we also have imagery. This is the EU Parliament building in Strasbourg, France, and it's modeled after the Tower of Babel by Bruegel. And again, we don't know that the Tower of Babel looked like that. It probably didn't, but that is the depiction that was in the minds of Europeans. And so here you have this European building, this EU Parliament building, that is represented to look like that. Now, this gets very tricky because I don't think that the EU is necessarily bad altogether. But here they're taking this motif and they're just borrowing some ideas. So again, doesn't mean everything that they're doing is bad, but it does make you wonder why they use that to help depict this. We also have from Crete, there's a seal impression from the great palace of Knossos, Minoan Crete. It shows a goddess on top of a mountain flanked by lions. It's that same idea. You have the woman, you have the lions or the beast. Another seal found in Knossos depicts a goddess walking on a lion and carrying a staff, much like the Sumerian Inanna above. All right, so this is probably the same motif. This motif was spread far and wide. We also have a plaque depicting a naked goddess on a horse, probably Astarte or Anat, found in Lachish, Israel. That's very important. This is from the Israel Museum of Jerusalem. And this is a plaque, goddess, location Lachish. All right, so 14th to 13th century BCE. Notice that she's riding a beast. All right, again, same idea. It doesn't have to be a lion necessarily, but it's riding this beast. And this is the thing that God was talking about, that they were worshiping this false idol. And it's really, in a word, it's pornography. It's base or carnality. God is absolutely pro relations between a man and a woman, but in the proper context. And then he says, go for it. You have my blessing over it. But of course, this is not what they were doing. They were doing it completely outside the bounds of a family relationship. And, well, babies come around, and when babies are not wanted, then they are destroyed. Now, to really bring all this together, where then is Babylon? What is Babylon? Well, we saw in Revelation 17 and 18, we saw kind of a spiritual aspect of it. And then we saw in 18 very much a physical place. Now, what's interesting is that I believe we've actually found the Tower of Babel, the actual location. So this location right here is in modern day Iraq. All right, it's just outside of this, what would have been the ancient city of Babylon. All right, so we can see here the ancient ruins of Babylon, and just to the right side of your screen, we have the Tower of Babel. And what's so incredible about this is that we have an inscription that was found by Nebuchadnezzar. All right, this is incredible. All right, so it says the tower, the eternal house. These are his own words, Nebuchadnezzar. Right, the tower, the eternal house, which I founded and built. I have completed its magnificence with silver, gold, other metals, stone, enameled bricks, fir, and pine. All right, so he did not build this, he finished it. Very important. He goes on. The first, which is the house of the earth's base, the most ancient monument of Babylon, I built and finished it. I have highly exalted its head with bricks covered with copper. We say for the other, that is this edifice, the house of the seven lights of the earth, the most ancient monument of Borsippa. A former king built it. They reckon 42 ages, but he did not complete its head. Since a remote time, people had abandoned it without order, expressing their words. Since that time, the earthquake and the thunder had dispersed the sun-dried clay. The bricks of the casing had been split, and the earth of the interior had been scattered in heaps. Now, what is he saying here? This is King Nebuchadnezzar. This is the new Babylonian era. He founded the city in 575. Again, take those grains, plus or minus maybe 10 years. But still, the Judeans have been taken captive by this guy, and he's now telling us that he did not begin building this structure, but he finished it. And he says that 42 ages, well, however long that is, we don't know, but 42 ages, it was built by a former king, and he did not complete its head. And he says that people had abandoned it without expressing their words. Now, that is a very, very curious phrase, without expressing their words. Well, we have in the book of Genesis a description of people building a tower whose height was going to reach into the heavens to make a name for themselves. And then the languages get scrambled. God says, no, you guys need to disperse. He scrambles the languages and they all leave. And then Nebuchadnezzar comes along and says, hey, I found this thing. I didn't start it. It was built by somebody else. It wasn't complete. And so I decided to finish it. And so he tells us, it's in bad shape. And he says, Merodach, the great god, excited my mind to repair this building. I did not change the site, nor did I take away the foundation. In a fortunate month, in an auspicious day, I undertook to build porticos around the crude brick masses and the casing of burnt bricks. I adapted the circuits. I put the inscription of my name in the kitir of the portico. Kitir is the crown. I set my hand to finish it and to exalt its head. As it had been done in ancient days, so I exalted its summit. Wow. All right, so we have the actual Tower of Babel, right? There it is. And King Nebuchadnezzar says that he didn't start it, he simply finished it. Amazing. So, what could be the end game? Here's what I'm going to suggest to you. Here's what I see happening in Revelation 17 and 18. I think that the enemy has a plan that he wants to create his own artificial mountain. All right. So an important point here is that the ziggurat of Enlil at Nippur was known as the house of the mountain of the storm, and the bond between heaven and earth. All right, so now this is not the same one that we just looked at in Babylon. This is at Nippur. That's a little ways away. But this is the ziggurat of Enlil. Enlil, we discussed, is in fact Satan. And it was known as the house of the mountain. He's known as the house. This is known as the house of the mountain. Why is mountain significant? Also, the bond between heaven and earth. Well, let's take a look for a second. We have throughout the world various edifices that look like pyramids, or they look like mountains. All right, they look like mountains. Let me come back to this for just a moment. Satan was cast down in Eden. What does God say concerning Satan? You were in Eden, the garden of God. You were on the holy mountain of God. Now, again, I don't have time to get into it in this study, but I have laid this out in another study. You can check it out, The Millennium, Heaven on Earth. I go into much detail about how the New Jerusalem is, in fact, a mountain. It's a mountain. It's not a cube. That's just a kind of a weird shape, but a mountain. Now that makes a lot of sense. And so essentially, the New Jerusalem is a pyramid. It's a mountain shape or a pyramid. And so where was he? He was in Eden, the garden of God. He was on the holy mountain of God. I cast you as a profane thing out of the mountain of God, and I destroyed you, and I cast you to the ground. All right, we see in Isaiah chapter 14 that he wants to ascend above the heights of the clouds, and he wants to sit on the top of the mountain of the congregation. That is where he wants to go. So Satan has been creating these false mountains, because as above, so below. He wants to recreate what is in heaven down here on earth and install himself as the one on the top. On the top of these fake mountains, if you will, of these ziggurats, there was a temple, and the temple, there would be cultic worship. And it wasn't there wasn't always necessarily sexual activity up there. Sometimes there may have been, and in fact, sometimes it's suggested that the priestess and the king would ascend to the top, and there they would consummate, which would, kind of a reenactment of what was happening with Inanna and Dumuzid. Well, be that as it may, at the very least, these mountains were thought to be a place where the god could reside at the top. And the god, in some cases, was Enlil, in some cases, was Inanna. And so we have this thing called the abomination of desolation. Let me back up one slide. So what is this abomination of desolation? Well, it's some kind of a horror-causing idol or statue or something that's going to happen in God's house, all right, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. this place is going to experience something awful that's going to happen. This has already happened in history. We know this when Antiochus Epiphanes went into the Holy of Holies, and there he sacrificed a pig, and the temple was desolate because there was an abomination that was sacrificed in that place. And it wasn't until after the War of the Maccabees, when they finally kicked out this, all of the Seleucids from that area, that they were able to finally reestablish, sanctify the temple. And of course, this is where we get the story of Hanukkah, comes from that as well. And so we see in Matthew, Jesus tells us, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, which is echoed in Daniel chapter 9, then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. So again, we see this in Daniel, and forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place the abomination of desolation. This is probably a reference to Antiochus IV, Antiochus Epiphanes. But we also see concerning a future day, and from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination of desolation is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Well, how do we know this is a future time? Because Jesus talks about it, right? And so Jesus would not be talking about something that happened in the past as if it were going to be something in the future. Now, it could be that something that happened in the past is a blueprint for what's going to happen in the future. And that's what I would suggest is going to happen. So what is Satan ultimately trying to get at? Well, here's what I suggest. Of course, my computer has to tell me this right now. So it says, let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing, that is, demonstrating one's qualities, that showing himself that he is God. So this person is going to do something so incredible, because remember, Satan is going to give him his power, his throne, and his authority. Those are all going to be given to this person. And so we're going to see him with the bow, right? He's going to have the crown of the 10 horns, and he's going to have all this power to do stuff. So he's not just somebody who's talking big, but he can show it, right? Talk is cheap. This guy is going to have the goods to demonstrate that he is God. And so here's what I suggest he wants to do, is that the end game is to go into God's temple and to desecrate that, to go into God's city. Doesn't mean all the Jews are perfect, but Jerusalem is God's city. All right. Doesn't mean that they're perfect, because they're not. But Jerusalem is his city, and to desecrate that place. Whereas in Babylon, that's his place, that's his city, that's been Satan's abode for a very long time, is that he wants to then establish himself as the kingpin of that place. All right, so let's bring this all back together. Who is the woman that rides the beast? Who is this mystery Babylon? I would suggest that it is, in fact, a rebuilt city, a future city that we do not see today, a future city of Babylon. It will be in the Middle East. It will be in the general area of Iraq. I showed you the map. It's going to be right next to that ancient temple, that ancient ziggurat, which is, in fact, according to, as far as I can tell, that is the ancient Tower of Babel. According to Nebuchadnezzar, he did not build it. He simply finished it. It had been built years ago, ages ago, and people had just abandoned it. That sure sounds like the Tower of Babel. And what was happening at the Tower of Babel? Well, of course, men were not following God's dictates. He scrambled the languages. And then sometime after that, we don't know exactly when, but this cult of Inanna rises up. And Inanna is this god of sexual perversion. We see that she's depicted as naked. She's riding a beast in place after place after place. This was exported to the whole world, but the epicenter of this, the origin of this, is in Babylon. Do we find traces of it in New York City? You better believe it. Do we find traces of it in Las Vegas? Oh, yeah. Do we find traces of it in France, in Spain, all through Europe? Do we find it in India? Yes, we find it almost everywhere that we can imagine. But the origin is in the place that we know as Babylon, the place that we know as modern day Iraq. And a city is going to rise up out of the desert, and it's going to be this incredible city. All the things that we see in Revelation chapter 18 will be in that city. You might say, well, how could something happen so quickly? Technology is changing. We see with 3D printing, it's possible to build incredibly quickly. It's also possible to build with prefab construction methods. They can build a lot of a new building in a factory. All right, and so I've seen tremendously large buildings go up in short time. Now, often they're maybe 2 or 3 stories high, but they have an incredible amount of floor space. This would be something like a factory or something where we have a gigantic warehouse. But it is possible to go up high as well. We don't know how tall this building is going to be or this city, but it is possible to build something very, very quickly. And I believe that the description we have in Revelation chapter 18 and 17 will be fulfilled in a future city. And that city will be the place where Satan is going to have his endgame. He's going to desolate Israel. He is going to go into the temple in Israel to desolate that place so that he can be king on his own hill, to be king on his own mountain. And ultimately, God is going to destroy that place. Now, I have a whole scene worked out in movie number 2, which I'm getting very excited about. This is the movie project that I've been talking about. So just keep that in mind. It's going to be a lot of fun, but more to come on that. So that is what I believe that we see in Revelation 17 and 18. It is an actual city. It's in Babylon. It's not New York City. It's not Rome. It's none of those others, but it will be that very place. All right, I have about 10 minutes for questions, and so I look forward to taking your questions, and then I'm going to have to take off. So let's see. Whoever has the best questions gets to go first here. So let's see. Did anybody ask questions? Let me go back here, take a look at these, and let's see here. Okay. A lot of interesting comments. That's great, guys. All right, here's a question. Aren't those who mourn by throwing dust on their heads Middle Eastern? Would they mourn over the destruction of Rome or New York City? I think that's a great point. That's true. You typically don't see that from New Yorkers. There's no dust to actually pick up, but you do find a fair amount of dust in the Middle East. So I think that's strengthens the point there. So thank you. That's good. Okay, here's some other questions. I think I'm looking for them. It always helps me when you guys put the word question right in front of it, and that way I know it's an actual question for me instead of just an interesting comment. Someone asked, did God create Satan? Yes, he did. And I have a teaching on that, the angelic domain and the fall of Satan. I encourage you to check that out. I also have another series called Satan the Slanderer. Those are both on my YouTube channel, so do check those out. Here's a question. What do you think about the timeline that New Babylon was built in Iraq? Well, again, really big speculation here, but when I consider that the transhumanists are suggesting that by 2045 we're going to achieve the singularity. If they're even in the ballpark, okay, let's assume for a second that they're in the ballpark, then we would probably expect to see the city of Babylon rebuilt sometime maybe within 10 years before that. That would be my best guess. Okay, maybe by 2035. Again, I could be completely wrong. All right. So, it's so hard to put dates on stuff and you always get in trouble. But, I've told you that's speculation. So that's my speculation on that matter. But I think it could happen very quickly. The technology we have nowadays is absolutely amazing. We're able to, we, the human race, right? We now have technology where we can actually pull humidity out of the air. That may be one way that we're able to turn the desert into a lush paradise. Again, and there's also, of course, solar power. That'd be one way to help capture some of the energy. Some people have suggested if they put in a bunch of solar arrays, that would actually lower the ground temperature. That might help things to thrive. So again, there's so many different possibilities. There's lots of research that you can check out. Great videos on YouTube. Many of them are very well done, and talking about terraforming the desert. So there's different options as to how this would all come together. We even see in Saudi Arabia that they now have, let's see, I'm trying to think of the name of this new region. It's like Noam. I think it's Noam. It's a large chunk. It's like this. It's size of a maybe Maryland or Virginia or something. That's allocated. It's just desert, and they really believe they're going to turn this into a thriving city. So we see that. Of course, we see Dubai. There's a city. Now that's taken 50 years to build roughly, but still to go from desert to this gigantic, thriving metropolis is really quite incredible. So thanks for the question. All right. Where does Islam play a part in this, being in Iraq? Well, that's a great question. My speculation is that if somebody with lots of money came in, said, we want to buy some of your desert that's not being used for anything, if the people of Iraq were desperate, if they felt that this person meant to do them no harm, they might be willing to do such a thing. All right. Again, that's speculation. So again, it's hard to say. What I see, though, is that many of the Muslims they could be taken in by the mark of the beast. Some of them may, again, speculation, but they may presume that mark to be an indication that the person that people that take that are actually blessed by Allah. Okay, so could be, and I could be wrong on that as well. So, but I think if we had some kind of a upheaval in the world economics, and suddenly oil was not the big thing, and now people are literally hungry. If somebody came in with the right incentive, they might actually go for it. And not everybody is hardcore Muslim, right? Some people are very moderate Muslims. And, they just want to raise their kids like a lot of people do. And they just want to get through life, and they're not intent on seeing all their enemies destroyed and all that stuff. So there could be a scenario where something could happen, and the Muslims would be okay with that. All right, question. In this day, folks speak of AI and transhumanism. Could the temple desecration be the human soul? Well, certainly part of that. I think that's a possibility, and I think it may include that. I think it might include that, but I really do see from Daniel, from Second Thessalonians, that really these are speaking of an actual place, an actual temple made with bricks or cement or whatever, that it's going to be that kind of place. The scenario I see happening is that the Antichrist will go in. He will have been transformed. He will be a genetic hybrid with Satan. And then he's going to make this available to the world. I think that's going to happen in the temple. The Jews who have been wanting a temple, are going to slowly wake up and realize that they've been had, that they got suckered into something, they got sold a really bad deal, and many of them are going to head for the hills. Some of them won't figure it out, maybe until it's too late. But that's part of the deception, is that he's deceiving them, and they think they're doing something good, but they're not. Is the RFID chip the mark of the beast? Not in my opinion. Not in my opinion. I believe the mark of the beast is going to be a genetic transformation between where we have Satan and the person known as the Antichrist. It's going to be a mingling of their seed, and then it'll be a cloning or a reproduction of that seed, and then mass producing it for the rest of the world. Why would anybody do that? Because what this new genetic strain promises is that you'll become a god, you'll have superhuman strength, super intelligence, super everything, and that is the reason you want to take it, because you'll become a god. And so I don't think the RFID chip is the mark of the beast. So, okay, here's a question. What is the purpose of the Tower of Babel? Is it true that it was similar to CERN? I'm not sure that it was similar to CERN. I don't know if there's necessarily any connection between CERN and the Tower of Babel. I'm really thinking that there's going to be more some kind of a quantum computer type thing that could potentially open up a gateway. I think the abyss is going to open very close to this city. Speculation, but I think that will be more than likely. And there may be some kind of technology from CERN potentially, or some kind of a quantum computer type technology that could open some kind of a gateway between our dimension and the dimension where the spiritual entities live, and that will allow them to come through. The Tower of Babel, well, I think the Tower of Babel is really, it's a demonstration of man's defiance against God. God gives man some instructions for his benefit, and man says, forget it, God, we're not going to do it. We're going to do it our own way. And that they were then really, in a sense, trying to become gods themselves. They were trying to make a name for themselves. And it doesn't sound so terrible at first, but really making a name for yourself in the sense that they were trying to do it was not a good thing, because rather than being content in the relationship they had with God and finding their joy and their peace and their satisfaction in Him, they wanted to do it on their own terms. And so at its most basic, I think that's kind of it. I got time for maybe one, maybe two more questions, and then I really have to run, but these are great questions. Does anyone know how to change it? Okay, sorry. Great. Well, good, guys. I think that is, let's see here. Interesting questions. I really got to go. Guys, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun. I always enjoy these times. I hope that this was something that was beneficial to you. I want to let you know before I go, though, we're having a conference July 18th, 19th, and 20th here in Denver, Colorado. You are invited. We're gonna get the tickets up really quickly. $25 for a single and $40 for a family is the early bird price. That is super, super cheap. And we are subsidizing this because we want people to come, at least for the early bird special. So if you get that before April 30th, then you will get the early bird price. That will include 6 meals per person, right? So that's an amazing deal. We invite you to come. If you want to come and join us for Passover, April 19th here in Denver, Colorado, that would be wonderful. It's going to be Friday evening. You could then spend Shabbat with us as well, as we celebrate this wonderful feast that the Lord has given us. So keep those two things in mind. Those are happening this year, but keep in mind the One in Messiah conference that will be happening here in Denver, Colorado. You're invited. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be very family friendly, and you won't want to miss it. So until next time, God bless you. Take care and stay in the Word.